People are so caught up in meditation that you have to be sitting on a cushion and you have to do it for 15 minutes. And I really want people to understand that, just staring out the window or painting or going for a walk, without your headphones in, or swimming, something like that, where you kind of get lost in time. That is a form of meditation. That's letting your brain process your day and de-stress. So I just want people to not be so hard on themselves. I see that a lot in my classes, and it leads to them not doing it at all. So I really want folks to know that they can find something they love to do, and that's a form of meditation as well.
Namaste. You're listening to the Savannah Podcast. Join us on an exploration of Eastern spirituality, yoga philosophy, and conscious living for the new age. This podcast is a production of SavannahSpirit.com, the best place to shop for unique clothing, spiritual handcrafted jewelry, healing gemstones, and fair trade gifts from the Far East. Now, here's your host, Brett Larkin.
Hello, my friends. If you have a hard time saying no without feeling guilty about it, you definitely need to keep listening to this episode. Today, we get to talk with Reiki master teacher and Yin yoga teacher, Kristi Kuttner. We're going to talk all about self-care. And Kristi is really the perfect person to talk to about this because, well, you'll just see once you get to know her in this episode. But she, in addition to being a Yin yoga teacher and master Reiki teacher, she sells really beautiful and unique products that encourage you to practice self-care. My favorite of those products is a really beautiful meditation cushion she sells. It's very luxurious and it has this unusual star shape. You may have seen it on my Instagram, and it's really just the perfect shape to support your hips and spine. She's going to teach us in this episode how we can say no without apologizing. It's definitely a skill I know I need to learn. And we're going to discuss how to find balance. How do we find that sweet spot between self-discipline in our yoga and meditation practice and self-care? So we're going to be talking a lot about tips and tricks for getting on the mat consistently, but how to do that without pushing yourself. This is all about how to fit self-care into your yoga practice today and really give your body the discipline and structure it needs in terms of yoga, but without overdoing it. Before we jump into today's episode, I just want to remind you, support the show. Support the show by leaving a rating or review here on iTunes. It makes a huge difference. And right now, as a thank you for leaving a rating or review, I will send you my favorite journaling and affirmations, my favorite journaling prompts and affirmations, as a really beautiful PDF booklet. So all you have to do is leave a rating or review here on iTunes. Even if iTunes isn't how you normally listen to the show, take a screenshot of your posted review, email that screenshot just on your phone to me at info@brettlarkin.com, and I will send you this really beautiful PDF guide as a thank you. The other way you can support the podcast is by making a purchase on SavannahSpirit.com. Remember, you can take $25 off anything in their online store by just using that coupon code TAKE25. It's going to take $25 off whatever's in your shopping cart. And today I'm highlighting their Buddha Blessing Oil Diffuser. It's a really beautiful carved soapstone oil diffuser, just really unusual. And it's perfect for invigorating your space and bringing relaxing scents into your self-care practice, which perfect for today's episode because we're mainly talking about self-care and self-nourishment. All right, let's get into this conversation with Kristi. Kristi, thank you so much for being here and coming on the show.
Thank you for having me, Brett. I love you dearly, so I'm really excited to be here.
I love you too. And we're going to talk about a really important topic today, which is self-care and self-love. And these terms get thrown around a lot in the yoga world, but I feel like looking at your Instagram and also just knowing your energy and how you operate as a person, I feel like you're going to have some really good tips for us on how to actually implement self-care, practical things, and how to prioritize yoga and meditation as well.
Yes, definitely. It's my life path to get more people inspired to practice self-care.
So why don't you walk us through what your self-care practice looks like? What's working for you? And then what are the big takeaways you want to give the listeners to implement around this right away? Because I'm sure you get this question as a yoga teacher all the time, and I do, but people want to know, like, how do they make their yoga practice consistent? How do they make their meditation practice consistent? I think that's the hardest part of all of this, is the consistency aspect of it. Do you agree?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I think with consistency, it's so ingrained in me now that it's hard for me to not do it.
And that's where like everyone wants to get to. So tell us your journey. Like, how did you get to that point? And what does your kind of daily self-care practice look like right now? Like when you wake up in the morning?
Well, how I got here was, I feel like I was born and raised in Michigan. My mother is incredibly wonderful, and my father and my mother, but I was never really taught how to love myself. In fact, like the opposite. Any woman I was around, it was like, oh, I hate my thighs and I'm on a diet, and, or I'm giving all of my energy to everyone else as a nurturer. So I never really was around a role model that did self-care. And about 10 years ago, my hormones started to really be imbalanced. And I was in my late 20s. And then they just kind of got worse and worse. And I found myself really needing to love myself to heal my body from the inside out. Self-care was like mandatory for me in order to heal. So my self-care routine daily changes, but I want to say the biggest thing for me in self-care is saying no. And it's really hard for me to do that because I want to say yes to everything and help everyone. But I found that was a big part of my hormonal imbalance, was just overdoing, overworking, perfectionism. So my self-care nowadays is a lot of inner work. Like I wake up in the morning, I go directly to the mirror and I say, I love you, with my hand over my heart 3 times. I pay attention to what the people that I'm around, how they either lift my energy or drain my energy. And if I feel really elevated when I'm around them, well, then I'm around them more. The obvious things like bubble baths and manicures, pedicures, like things like that. But for me nowadays, my self-care has moved much more inward in how I speak to myself during meditation, like mantras, affirmations.
And that's great that you're getting into that, because that was going to be my next question. Kind of, what does your yoga and meditation practice look like, and how are you pulling that into the self-care piece? Because something I think a lot of people struggle with, and I feel like I could talk about this for hours, but it's like, where do you draw that line between being disciplined with yourself and saying, hey, you really have to get on your meditation cushion every day, hopefully one of your cushions, and like at the same time having that openness to be like, well, what do you really need today? Because the mind is so tricky, and we'll be like, oh, well, I need to sleep in and I don't need to meditate today. And like that can kind of seem like self-love, right? But we do need that discipline as well. So I'm curious what your yoga and meditation practice looks like and how you kind of surf that kind of paradox.
Well, for me, mine, like I mentioned with my hormones, and I think a lot of people can relate to this, even if it's not like severe hormonal imbalance, but just having those ups and downs of moods and energy and everything like that. So I'm really asking myself what I need that day. So like if I'm, say just started my period, I'm not going to do a vinyasa class. Like I'm going to ask myself, maybe my yoga is just legs up the wall, or like, just a meditation, one of your guided meditations. I lay there and listen to it. So I think, there's discipline, but it's also really checking in like with what you need, because for a long time I was caught in like, I have to do 30 to 60 minutes every day of yoga. I have to, meditate every morning when I wake up. And sometimes that changes. Sometimes I'm like more tired and I want to just do a nice restorative practice and then do a meditation after. So I think, but you're always going to feel better after you do it. And once you make it a habit, and another tip too is like, I play like a trick with my mind. Like I'll just do 5 minutes. And I mean, I don't know about you, but it's hard to do yoga for just 5 minutes. You get in that, like, it feels good and you kind of keep going.
Yeah, a lot of this is the advice I give people too, which is just try to make it to your mat and just tell yourself, I'm just going to do child's pose. And then, right, it always ends up evolving into something else. And I think we're getting on something that's hopefully helpful to all of you listening, which is that the discipline can just be around making it to your mat. It doesn't have to be around doing a particular practice. So it's just like come to your mat or come to your cushion and do something. And that could look very different day to day after you check in with yourself. I'm curious though, Kristi, what are your thoughts on having a consistent time in which you practice each day? Because on the one hand, I think, we want that flexibility and, pending what's going on with your body, or, maybe you're recovering from something. Maybe you just started your period, like you said, like an evening practice might seem more appealing than a morning practice. At the same time, at least I know from my own personal experience, what happens first in the day and what happens in the morning is what always gets done, right? So for me, really pushing myself to do that come to the mat time, whether it's relaxing or maybe a more heating practice, but making myself do it always in the morning has worked really well, because I notice otherwise it can slip away and not end up happening. What has your experience been with this?
My experience is, I have a long routine in the morning, and I get up early, but it's really important for me to start my day that way. Otherwise, I spin into that cortisol hormonal downslide throughout the day. So like starting my morning with meditation, and it looks differently some days. I try not to be super strict on myself. Like some days I really, really like guided meditations. And other days I'm just like, you know what? I just want to sit with a blanket over my shoulders and quiet. And so but I believe starting your day right off the bat is a really, really important piece of just happiness, ease into the rest of your day. Because, before you check any social media, before you look at electronics, all that stuff changes our brain waves. And it's really important to get into that state where you're chill first. You can approach those emails and texts and things that you need to accomplish in a different mindset. And I believe practicing in the morning is really important. I honestly, I think having 2 meditations a day, like one right in the morning, and then I do another one like when I get home. If, I've been out all day, I do just legs up the wall for 10 to 15 minutes, just to kind of like disconnect from the energy of being outside of my home.
When I interviewed Judith Hansen-Lassiter, who's so amazing, and oh my gosh, it's life-changing to talk to her. And guys, I know if you haven't listened to the podcast, the Savannah podcast with her, do that after this episode. But she said something very similar, where she was saying to do a shavasana every single day as a sort of siesta. And that sounds very similar to what you're saying, like doing a legs up the wall. And I actually started doing it after recording that podcast interview with her. Not every single day, but a lot more often. Before I wasn't really doing that. Sometimes I'd do a before bed meditation, but just doing shavasana for 20 minutes. She said, set a timer, do 20 minutes. And it is so invigorating and refreshing to have that sort of mid-afternoon rest.
Right. And for the rest of your family and like everyone you're around too, because it clears your head.
She was saying in her family, like whenever she was in a bad mood, her sons would tell her, Mom, you need to go shavas yourself. Like go take shavasana. I was like, that's awesome. I'm using that.
I actually just took her anatomy intensive, and she told me an exercise for me specifically is to go first thing in the morning to the mirror and say, I love you 3 times, looking at myself. And so I've been doing that ever since I had that course with her.
Did it feel really awkward when you first started doing it?
Yeah. It was a thing where people can relate, because I was like, a day would go by and I'm like, I don't feel like doing that. I don't feel like doing that. But I just made myself do it. And now it's a habit. I get up and I go, look in the mirror and just put my hands over my heart and say, I love you. I love you. I love you.
Did it feel like fake when you first started doing it and now it feels more authentic? Because I think with a lot of those things, people just feel so silly when they first start doing them. So I'm just curious if you're willing to share with everyone, like how it's progressed for you?
It felt really fake at first, but I realized it was a wake-up call and how hard it is for me to look in the mirror and not tear myself down. Like I couldn't, it was really difficult for me to look in the mirror and